Now, as Ontario's number of positive COVID cases continues to rise, Toronto may be taking some tough measures. Today, City Council will be considering the latest recommendations from Toronto's Medical Officer of Health for revised restrictions when it comes to restaurants and bars, including limiting the number of people in those bars and restaurants and collecting contact information from all patrons. Those are just a few. So with that, we're joining Mayor John Tory for his weekly update, joining us via Skype this morning. Mayor Tory, how are you?
I'm fine, Mel. How are you?
Doing well. Before we actually get to COVID-19, I do want to get your take on the debate last night. I assume you did watch.
I thought it was one of the worst things I've ever watched because, I'm a great believer in the democratic process, obviously. I've been a candidate. I've helped other people to get elected over the years, and I've probably done more televised debates than any politician in Canada because when you run for mayor of Toronto, you do upwards of 100, most of which are televised. And I just thought it was, and it was led by the president, even the moderator. Even the moderator said at one stage, look, it's unusual that I would intervene on one side as opposed to the other, but you are just misbehaving yourself. And there was just, it was uncivilized. It was rude. It was a bad example for a lot of young people that were watching. And it was discouraging because what you have to hope is that you could have a discussion of real big issues we confront now, starting with COVID and working down the list, racial issues and other things. And it was so discouraging in that regard. And so I just hope that we can avoid that kind of thing here, that sort of polarization and division. I try my hardest as somebody in public office not to behave that way because it just discourages people and it gives them no hope and it gives them a sense of resignation about the process. So to me, it was just a bad scene and it just was something that did no good for anybody in my view. And I just hope they can do better the next time.
Yeah,
somebody had an idea of why don't they just when you're having your supposed 2 minutes of uninterrupted time, why don't they just turn off the mic of the other person?
That's it.
Because just turn it off. If you're not supposed to interrupt, you're not supposed to speak during that time. It's the other person's turn off your mic. But it requires just a little bit of self-discipline, which it seemed in particular the president just didn't have last night. He may have been quite deliberate. I don't know. I don't understand it.
Yes, there's so much to unpack here, Mayor Tory, which we will do throughout the show here. But yeah, I think we can all agree that was not productive for anyone. Let's get right to what's happening here. Looking ahead to City Council meeting, Dr. Davila has put forth a number of recommendations when it comes to gathering numbers within restaurants and closures and whatnot. I want to get your take moving into City Council meeting. I know obviously you take what she says to heart. Do we assume a lot of these recommendations are going to pass?
Oh, I'm sure they will, because I think that people not only understand that we've seen a resurgence of the virus here, and that we're seeing evidence of it spreading within different segments of the community, especially younger people and their mobility around and about to different places. And, I feel very badly about the fact a lot of the attention has to be on the restaurant and bar industry. But a fact that is just a true fact is that a lot of the congregation of people is happening in those particular settings. And we've tried very hard to give them much more outdoor space. We're now trying to extend the life of those things through heaters and so on the street patios we've put in place, hundreds of the street patios. And I'm asking today by a motion that I'm going to put forward that we examine winter patios because I'm afraid to say restaurants and bars and banquet halls and other places will continue to be a focus of ours, as it must be. And it's not my focus, it's the focus of the Medical Officer of Health. And I know the feds are working on a program of assistance, and I've been encouraging the Deputy Prime Minister, and she's very committed to keeping their throne speech promise, and I commend her for that, to help this industry, which is struggling. But we've got to place health right at the top of the list and try to do things in a way that's, yes, sensitive to their needs, but at the same time stopping the spread of this virus. And the case count numbers have been very discouraging, and we can't afford to have it spread to the point where it gets back into long-term care and back into schools, for example, which I think we want to try to keep open at all costs for the sake of the kids and their parents. So it's a discouraging situation we're in at the moment, but I hope people are, as a result, very patient and understanding of the things that we have to do in order to, do our very best with something we still don't know that much about to keep this contained.
Mayor, I assume you've had some recent conversations with the Premier, and a lot of people are asking the question, when, if, are we going back to stage 2? Can you provide any insight into that?
No, because I can't, because there's no answer to that question. There could be further measures that we have to undertake, tomorrow or 2 weeks from now. But what we're doing is relying on the advice of experts and the medical people to tell us what is going to be effective, because that's what we're focused on. And we're focused on it in a very balanced way, knowing that everything you do to go back towards a situation we were in before, maybe not all the way, but maybe part of the way, which is really what we're doing by having more restrictions that are proposed on table capacity and restaurant capacity. We're going back in that direction. But, the more you go, it's all accompanied by a very careful consideration. I want people to know on my part, I know on the Premier's part and all of his advisors and all of mine, of the consequences of that. But the number one consequence we have to look at is stopping the loss of life, stopping the spread of this virus into places you don't want it to go, like into long-term care and places like that. And so, we're having the discussions continuously with our advisors, with each other, and we will try our very best, as we have throughout, just to do the right thing. And, that's very difficult to determine, and it's a very difficult balancing act. But we haven't sort of had a discussion saying, well, next Tuesday or tomorrow morning we're doing this or that. It's a day-by-day thing, and it's a kind of a moving target.
I'm looking at Dr. Davila was talking about, the idea of social bubbles. Really, that's no longer valid. And you kind of touched to that point here when it comes to what we do on a daily basis. I want to see if you have an update here when it comes to enforcement. And that's what a lot of people have been critical of is, there are very clear rule breakers who are out there and they are just ignoring some of these very basic social distancing rules. Where do we stand with enforcement right now?
Well, I mean, we stand at a place that I think, if people think about it for a second, is realistic, which is that, the medical officer of health last week had no hesitation whatsoever from people that are, in effect, repeatedly thumbing their nose at the system in ordering places closed. And that's the ultimate sanction we have, to close places down. There were tickets issued. There were tickets issued at a big party in Scarborough where people were having all kinds of people contrary to all the rules. But I think people also know that when it's a city like this, a big city of 3 million people with 7,000 bars and restaurants, hundreds of thousands of homes where people could be having parties, dozens and hundreds of subway cars, buses and streetcars, it is not feasible, it is not possible, it is not practical to have somebody lurking around every corner, nor do people necessarily want that kind of a place where there's some bylaw officer or somebody in a uniform peeking around every corner. It relies on personal behavior, as it always has. And her advice as a result, and you mentioned this, is to now say, and we haven't been able to put it into an order, in effect, but the advice is to say, please just hang out with people in your own household other than going to school and going to work. And that is the advice. And it's back towards a situation more close to what we had in the spring. But that is the advice. And I hope people will start to follow that practice. As much as people, I'm sure, took some delight in the fact that in the summer we were able to open things up again, now the numbers are moving in a direction that says, please stay home. That's the message we gave in the spring, you might remember, and nobody liked it, including me. But we're saying to people, socialize and whatnot with people in your own household and avoid all this. So therefore, an enforcement situation becomes less of a problem, because if people aren't out partying, then there's not as much to enforce. But transit and stores, you have to rely on the owners and the customers to behave themselves. And most people are, to be candid. Most people are. It's a small little minority that are not.
Yeah, with the weather changing, though, of course, there is the concern that some of those gatherings then move indoors. And then how do you enforce in private
absolutely.
properties,
It gets
right?
harder. I mean, it gets harder. What do? Do you start knocking on doors and seeing when they open the door what's going on inside?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, people know that. And so I think if they want to preserve life, if they want to preserve the healthcare system, if they want to preserve, not going back to a full lockdown, then they know what they have to do, which is not do things you would have your mouth hanging open at if you opened the door and saw a huge party going on inside.
Mayor Tory, as always, appreciate your time. And I noticed you are wearing your orange shirt for Orange Shirt Day today.
And we should really, remember that, because this was something, that happened in my lifetime. And it was a disgrace that we took people away from their homes, far away from their homes. They were abused. They were told they couldn't speak their own language. And it's a part of our history that is shameful. But if we can remember it, then I think we can learn from it and respect and pay tribute to our Indigenous people at the same time.
Well said, Mayor Tory. As always, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.